These are among the most studied examples of non-functional doors in the archaeological record, and the scholarly explanation for them is well established and internally coherent. They were not meant to be physical passages. They were symbolic thresholds, metaphysical architecture, the carved intention of a crossing rather than the crossing itself. The Egyptians understood the distinction between the physical and the spiritual, and the false door was a deliberate representation of the latter rather than a failed attempt at the former. This explanation is convincing for the classic examples: the flat carved stelae, the painted representations, the stylized hieroglyphic frameworks that clearly belong to the grammar of mortuary symbolism. But there is a subcategory of Egyptian false door that sits less comfortably in this explanation. There are examples in certain old kingdom mastabas and in the inner chambers of temples whose full function is not entirely understood, where the false door is not flat, where it projects from the wall with the depth and the structural mass of a real doorway, where the lintel is load-bearing, where the surrounding stonework has been engineered with evident care to accommodate the stresses of a threshold that supports something above it. You do not engineer a load-bearing lintel for a painted symbol. The structural logic of a door does not require that labor unless the door is expected to bear weight, which is to say, unless it was designed to open. At what point does a false door become a sealed one? Nows rather than closures. Endings that were planned? No. The Great Pyramid of Giza contains, as far as the current state of exploration has established, several passages that are not passages. They proceed for some distance into or through the stone, and they end, not at a wall that was sealed after construction, not at a barrier that shows signs of later installation, but at surfaces that appear to have been built as terminals rather than closures. Endings that were planned, not applied. The most extensively discussed of these are the so-called air shafts of the Queen's Chamber, two narrow channels, approximately 20 by 20 centimeters in cross-section, that extend from the chamber walls into the body of the pyramid at upward angles. In 1993, a small robotic explorer called the Up You Out Project robot was sent up the southern shaft and discovered, at a distance of approximately 65 meters from the chamber, a small limestone door, fitted with two copper handles, set across the passage. The door was not broken. It was not crumbling. It was intact, apparently undisturbed, exactly as it had been placed sometime during or immediately after the pyramid's construction, approximately 4,500 years ago. In 2002, a second robot drilled a small hole through the door and inserted a camera. The camera revealed a short continuation of the shaft, and another door, approximately 20 centimeters beyond the first. The conventional interpretation of the copper-handled limestone door is that it is a ritual closure, a symbolic endpoint marking the shaft's spiritual rather than physical terminus. The copper handles, in this reading, are not functional hardware, but ceremonial objects, the architectural language of a door applied to a feature that was never meant to open. But copper handles are expensive. They require mining, smelting, shaping, and deliberate installation. They are not decorative flourishes that a civilization with precise engineering instincts applies arbitrarily to objects with no mechanical function. The handles on the door at the end of the Queen's Chamber shaft are, by any practical reading, the handles of a door that someone, at some point, intended to use. What is on the other side of the second door has not yet been determined. The robotic systems available have not been able to pass it. More capable systems are being planned. The door, in the meantime, remains where it was placed, with its handles and its sealed face and the 20 centimeters of passage between itself and the next question. The temple complex of Angkor, in present-day Cambodia, was built over several centuries by the Khmer Empire between the 9th and 15th centuries AD. It is the largest religious monument ever constructed, a complex of temples, reservoirs, and causeways extending across more than 400 square kilometers of managed landscape, oriented with the astronomical and cosmological precision that characterizes the great religious architectures of the ancient world. Angkor contains thousands of doors. The Khmer were extraordinary architects of the threshold. Their goppuras, The towering entrance pavilions that mark the transitions between the concentric zones of their temple complexes are among the most elaborately engineered doorways in human history, with corbelled vaults, axial alignments, and decorative programs of extraordinary complexity. And among those thousands of doors, there are a significant number that were sealed, not damaged, not collapsed, not closed by the slow encroachment of the jungle that eventually overwhelmed the complex, but sealed deliberately at the time of construction or shortly after, with sandstone blocks fitted precisely into the door frames and left there as permanent closures. The conventional explanation is that Angkor's architecture was built to a cosmological plan in which certain passages were conceptually present but physically prohibited, zones of the sacred landscape accessible in principle but not in practice, demarcations of divine space rather than human pathways. This explanation accounts for the general pattern. What it does not account for, in every case, is the infrastructure. Several of the sealed doors at Angkor are approached by causeways, long, elevated stone pathways that require their own substantial construction investment. A causeway exists to direct movement toward a destination. It is functionally an invitation. The sealed door at the end of a causeway is, in a most precise physical sense, a denied invitation, an architecture of approach that was built, apparently deliberately, to lead somewhere that could not be reached. Whether the denial was always the intention, or whether something intervened between the design of the approach and the sealing of the door, is a question that the stones do not answer. There is a pattern in the historical record of sealed and forbidden doors that receives less attention than the doors themselves, and it concerns what tends to happen in the vicinity of those doors in the centuries following their closure. At the Padmanabhaswamy Temple, the tradition of not opening Vault B was so thoroughly maintained that the very knowledge of what the vault contained, if anything, appears to have become uncertain over time. The temple's own administrative records are ambiguous on the point. The priestly lineage that maintained the temple across the centuries carried the prohibition forward without, apparently, carrying forward a complete account of its origin. At Angkor, the sealing of certain passages preceded the eventual abandonment of the complex, an abandonment that remains itself not fully explained, and that the Khmer capital was relocated to Phnom Penh in the 15th century for reasons that the historical record attributes to a combination of military pressure, trade route changes, and possibly environmental stress, but that have not been resolved into a single, complete account. At Giza, the door in the shaft was built during the pyramid's original construction and has remained undisturbed for 4,500 years. Whatever knowledge governed the decision to put a copper-handled door at the end of a narrow passage deep in the pyramid's body, and to put a second door beyond it, was not recorded in any text that survives. The pattern, such as it is this. The doors were sealed, and then the knowledge of why they were sealed, the specific, detailed, institutional knowledge that would have accompanied the sealing at the time it was done, did not survive as reliably as the sealing itself. The physical act of closure proved more durable than the explanation for it. What remains in each case is the door. Intact, sealed, still there. It is worth pausing, at this point in the account, to consider the full scope of what the category of sealed and inaccessible architectural spaces contains, because Vault B and the Queen's Chamber Shaft and the causeways of Angkor are examples from a much longer list. The Vatican's secret archives contain approximately 85 linear kilometers of shelving. The word secret in the name is a mistranslation of the Latin secretum, which means private rather than hidden, and the archives are, in principle, accessible to credentialed scholars. In practice, access requires specific application for specific documents, and large portions of the collection have never been systematically indexed in a form available to outside researchers. What is in those 85 kilometers of shelving is, in any comprehensive sense, unknown. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, built into a mountain in the Norwegian Arctic, was constructed to be unopened, its contents preserved behind sealed doors for a future that its builders hoped would never need them. The door to the innermost vault has been formally opened 3 times since the vault's completion in 2008. Each opening was an event. The door, in its normal state, is closed. Beneath the streets of Paris, beyond the sections of the catacombs open to the public, there is an estimated 300 kilometers of tunnel that has not been officially mapped in any complete form. The city has a police unit, the Cataflex, dedicated specifically to preventing unauthorized entry to these spaces. What they contain, in their unlit lengths, is not in any publicly available document. These are not ancient mysteries. They are contemporary ones, and they suggest that the sealing of spaces, the decision to build a door and then decline to use it, or to use it once and then seal it permanently, is not a behavior that belongs only to the distant past. It is a behavior that continues in various institutional forms into the present. There is an architectural principle, not always explicitly stated, but consistently present in the design traditions of cultures across the world and across time, that a door is not merely a functional object. A door is a statement about what lies beyond it, and the nature of that statement changes depending on whether the door opens or whether it does not. A door that opens says, "What is here can be reached." It says, "The space beyond is continuous with the space you stand in." It says, "You are welcome, or at least permitted, to cross." A door that does not open says something different. It says, "There is a beyond." It marks the existence of a space that has been distinguished from all the space on this side of it by the simple, enormous fact of being separated. It asserts that whatever is there is different enough from whatever is here to warrant the labor and the material and the engineering of a threshold. It says, "This is a boundary," and then it declines to say anything more. The doors that this script has been considering, the vault with the serpent-covered face and no latch, the limestone panel with copper handles at the end of a narrow shaft, the sealed goppers at the ends of Khmer causeways, share this quality. They were built with the full intentionality of a statement. They were placed with care. They were designed, in some cases with extraordinary technical precision, to last. And then they were left, not explained, not accompanied, in any surviving record, by a complete account of what they were for. The possibility worth sitting with is not that these doors were accidents or oversights, or the remnants of plans that were abandoned before they could be completed. The possibility worth sitting with is that the door, in each of these cases, is the point. That the statement being made was not about the space beyond the door, not primarily, but about the act of closing it, about the decision made at a specific moment by specific people with specific knowledge to say, "This is as far as you go." There is something about a door that resists being treated as merely an object. We understand intellectually that a door is stone or wood or metal, that it is a material thing, subject to the forces that act on all material things, to time and weather and structural stress and the slow, patient work of entropy. But we also understand, in some register that precedes or runs alongside the intellectual one, that a door is a threshold, that it marks a distinction, that the space on one side is different in some meaningful way from the space on the other. The oldest sealed doors in the world were built by people who understood this at least as well as we do, and probably better. People for whom the threshold was not a metaphor, but a living element of their cosmological and practical worlds, something that organized the relationship between the sacred and the profane, the known and the unknown, the living, and whatever lay beyond living. They built their doors. They sealed them with a care and a permanence that has outlasted everything else they made, the institutions, the texts, the lineages of knowledge that would have explained the sealing in its own terms. The explanation is gone. The door remains. And the question that the door, in its patient and absolute silence, continues to pose is not one that archaeology or engineering or institutional history has yet been able to answer with complete confidence. It is not. What is behind the door? That question is interesting, and it may eventually have an answer if the robotic systems improve and the legal frameworks shift and the political will exist to fund the work. The more difficult question, the one that the existence of the door itself, sealed by intention and not by accident, presses quietly against every explanation we offer for it, is this: who decided that you should know? And how certain are we that they were wrong?